context. It's actually the second webinar in a series of webinars which is conducted for the EbA community of practice. Today we will talk again about tools and methods, but looking in different projects. My name is Matthias Bertram. I'm advisor for the ecosystem-based adaptation project in Germany, which is funded by the ICI, the International Climate Change Initiative. And I can see that additional colleagues are now entering into the room. So thank you for joining us. Today, we would like to share with you some exciting news. First of all, on tools and methods for ecosystem-based adaptation in the context of Mexico, key messages from a regional workshop in Mexico. A second community news on an approach which is called Solutions for Ecosystem-Based Adaptation, or shortly EbA Solutions. A short introduction into this approach by our project, which intends to compile good practices for ecosystem-based adaptation under the Panorama initiative. And then finally, the main thematic input of today, looking into a project context in Brazil, experiences from our colleagues in Brazil, from the Ministry of Environment and the GIZ colleagues on applying a climate change impact assessment tool for the Atlantic forest in Brazil. So we have 1 hour to go, and I would propose that we start with some housekeeping rules for those of you who are not yet so familiar with our SABA webinar room. If you have questions and comments, feel free to use the chat function. I can see that some colleagues are now trying to activate their cameras. I would strongly advise not to do so because this might impair the connectivity of this internet connection. So I can see that Joachim, who just joined our webinar, it's great to see you, but I would advise that everybody keeps his or her camera switched off. And I will just try to deactivate your camera, Joachim. Sorry, this is not personal. Okay. In case you have technical issues or difficulties, feel free to contact our IT colleague Carlos Wirschmidt, who is very familiar with the SABA software and can help you in the background with any technical difficulties. And of course, a recording of this webinar will be made available on our website, Adaptation Community Net, and which makes it available for our EbA colleagues and practitioners who were not able to join this session here. In case you have questions, you can raise your hand by using the raise your hand button. If you are enjoying this session, you can use the smiley button. If you want to clap your hands, you want to applaud, you can use the clapping hand button. If, for instance, your boss is calling you or you simply have to step out the line, you can use the step out button. So you can see you have several functions you can use during this webinar. Now, after this housekeeping rules, I would propose we enter into our first input from Mexico, which is presented by our dear colleague Mariana Rejanis, who participated in a very exciting international meeting on implementing ecosystem-based adaptation projects. So, Mariana, what news do you have for us?
Thank you very much, Matthias. So we wanted to share very briefly about a workshop that we had in Mexico. It was an international workshop on the implementation of ecosystem-based adaptation projects. These took place from September 28th to the 30th, and this was led by INECC, one of our counterparts here in Mexico. It is the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change. and it was initially organized to close one of the projects they had funded by the GEF and the World Bank on ecosystem-based adaptation. But provided that we were collaborating with them, we decided to make this a joint effort, and in fact our colleagues from INECC will share more in depth their experiences and their lessons in the hopefully in the next webinar. But for now, we didn't want to miss the opportunity just to highlight a few things about this meeting. So here you can see all of us, and we had 13 speakers from 10 different countries. We had, of course, from Mexico, from Costa Rica, from Colombia, Peru, Uruguay, Germany, South Africa, Thailand, and the Philippines. There you can see they're highlighted in the map. And what we had were practitioners and professionals who had experience in implementing EbA projects. We had representation from governmental institutions such as I mentioned, the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change in Mexico, also the Ministry of Environment from some countries such as Uruguay, Thailand, also in the case of Thailand from the Royal Irrigation Department, some more research-oriented institutions such as the South African National Biodiversity Institute, the CATIE in Costa Rica, and other international organizations such as UNDP and the Spanish Cooperation Agency that was working in Costa Rica. So we had a very rich debate with our colleagues, and here we wanted to share some of the insights that were regarding EbA methods and tools. That is the topic of our webinar today. So there you are. Oh, sorry. There. So we discussed, we had the first day presentations, and the second day they were more work in tables and working tables, but here we can highlight about vulnerability assessments. One of the lessons was that we had a combination of scientific and participatory or community-level methods to assess vulnerability. This was highlighted as something very important, to have this balance and combination, not overly scientific, but have an input from the communities. Also, there were some inputs about exposure analysis, importance of climate scenarios, considering variability, temperature trends, extreme events, among others. But here also, some of the projects had very good experiences involving the community in making community-level risk maps or the changes that they have observed over time. Also, there was some discussion about sensitivity analysis, considering current environmental and social assessments. Here, something that was highlighted was the importance or the value added of gender, traditional approach, and consideration of local institutions, and the importance of working at multiple scales simultaneously, that it is as EbA projects are they are not straightforward. You need to consider simultaneous levels of action to reduce vulnerability. Something else about EbA measures, as I said, after assessments and during the assessments, the combination of expert and local knowledge, also for prioritization and selection of measures. And there was some, here it was Colombia, who shared about their experience using watershed modeling, that is water evaluation and planning system that is provided by the Stockholm Environmental Institute. And finally, in terms of EbA governance, it was highlighted and emphasized during all our discussions and presentations the importance of supporting local decision-making structures, that any intervention or EBA measure is embedded into the local institutions, and that there is something to keep on working. And here, Katia, for example, shared about multi-actor decision-making mechanisms, Colombia about a system to support decision-making. And these were some of the highlights in terms of tools and methods, and as I mentioned, our colleagues from INECC will gladly share more about their experience, about the dialogue and everything in the next webinar or later on. That's all from my side.
Okay, great, Mariana. So thank you very much for this update from Mexico and this wealth of tools and methods which have been used in various contexts from local level to up to higher level. And by this, I would like to open the discussion in case you have any clarifying questions for Mariana. You can do this either by raising your hand, which will allow us to activate your microphone. Or if you do not want to talk, of course, you can use the chat box and the bottom left side by typing down your questions. So we welcome any questions or comments from your side. Okay, I can see one question from Joachim Later mentioning, could you please elaborate more on the decision-making tools that you mentioned are being used in Colombia, Mariana? This would be the first question.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Yes, so what they shared, it was a project from TNC, the Nature Conservancy, and what they developed a system and in which they supported already existing institutions. They didn't want to create a new steering committee or a new mechanism for the intervention, so they have set up a network of local institutions that were some of them very fledgling, and they wanted to support in terms of capacity development or training into EBA, and they are forming the strategy. So I can't, for the moment, I can't share anymore, but I will happily ask our colleagues from Colombia or share a little bit more further on. But it was just a strategy they had of working with already existing institutions and developing their capacities.
Okay, Mariana, thank you very much. In the meantime, there are two more questions, one from Jennifer and Martin. Are there any written reports on the meeting? And there is one question from Annie. Could you please elaborate on the multiple scales of analysis and action to reduce vulnerability?
Yes, so in terms, let me see the one about the documentation, we are working on that. That's why our colleagues from INECC will share more later on. We are currently, because it was just recently, so the moderator that was working on these is still doing that, but we can gladly share that. And let me tell you that if you want to access the presentations or all the inputs I can share with you, they are already uploaded in the blog of the Mexican-German Alliance of Climate Change, which is climate.blue, and there you can access and download the presentations and the agenda. It is in German and in Spanish, but the presentations, most of them are in English. And Annie's questions about elaborating on multiple scales of analysis and action to reduce vulnerability, that was raised by our colleague from UNDP, and there is a presentation on all the levels in which they were working at community level, more of ecosystem, because it was regional. It was not just one community that was involved, and then local government, state government that can be subnational, and then at the national or federal level. They were working with indigenous communities in Peru, so that's why they realized that they, in order to implement their measures or their solutions, they had to be working at these multiple levels to ensure that they will prevail over time and had an impact. And I will put the, sorry, I'll share the URL in the chat or the blog.
Okay, so this will be the URL for the Climate Blue. And we can also upload the report to our Adaptation Community Net website, where you can also download the information. So once again, Mariana, thank you very much for this exciting meeting in Mexico involving so many different colleagues. And now we would come to our second news. Currently, our global project is working on an approach which is called a solutioning approach, which is actually an approach to compile and share various success stories on ecosystem-based adaptation in a specific format, and to make it available for a broad audience of policymakers, decision takers, and practitioners. And by EbA Solutions, we mean solutions which are able to address challenges of the current but also future climate change impacts to sustainable development and human well-being by an active management and use of ecosystems. But solutions should be also effective and should have been applied with a demonstrated impact. They should be able to they should be scalable to different sectors or regions or levels. And finally, they should inspire decision makers and practitioners. And we are quite sure there are many solutions out there, and this is one of the mandate of our projects to compile and make these solutions available. But what do we actually exactly mean by solutions? So for us, in our context, a solution is a successful approach which is able to solve a specific problem caused by climate change, but also by other impacts. It should address the current and future climate change impacts, such as floods or droughts or storms, sea level rise, melting of glaciers, so immediate threats and impacts, but also threats which might evolve over a longer period of time. Solutions normally, they consist of what we call building blocks. So let's say if a solution is a success story, a building block would be something like a success factor. So building blocks are key elements of a solution. It can be instruments and tools or methods, approaches or partnerships or even processes, which ultimately lead to the success of a certain approach or story. They can be adapted or recombined with others to address other challenges, maybe in a different setting, a different socio-cultural or ecological or political setting, or in a different region. Just to give you one example, what you see on the right side would be a solution for ecosystem-based coastal protection, in this case from Vietnam, where the success story consists of building blocks or success factors such as mangrove restoration, risk assessment, which again is a very important tool and method to understand why your certain system of interest is at risk. Awareness raising activities, for instance, together with local communities or decision makers, and capacity development. Just to give you one example. This initiative is not new. It is part of the Panorama Initiative, Solutions for a Healthy Planet, which was initiated by GIZ and IUCN under the Blue Solutions project. So, and the idea from this Blue Solutions project and Panorama was one question: what if we could learn from each other's success? I do not want to bore you with a very complicated picture, but the essence of the solutioning approach is that there is a solution provider, which you can see here on the left side, who has knowledge, who has experience, and can share success stories to a broader community. These success stories or solutions, including building blocks, are published on a platform which is called Panorama Platform. It is already online since September and is currently consisting of marine and coastal solutions and also protected area solutions. But our initiative will also use this solution approach to create a third portal, which is called EbA Solutions. And the idea is to give answers, practical approaches and tools and methods to solution seekers, let's say a practitioner or a government or an organization which is looking for ideas, let's say how to protect a coastal zone or how to protect a community or an ecosystem or a biome, and is looking for ideas. And the idea is to bring the solution seekers and providers together via certain mechanisms, including the Panorama platform, but also via workshops, trainings, and additional communication formats like this webinar, for instance. So this is the, let's say, the background and the framework of the solutioning approach. You can find the website on panorama.solutions. It is available in English, French, and Spanish. Currently, there are more than 240 solutions online, not yet the ecosystem-based adaptation solutions, but marine and coastal solutions and protected area solutions. And you can browse them. You can browse them by ecosystems, by regions, by sectors. You can use a world map to find solutions which are, for instance, applied in Latin America or Africa. So it gives you a nice overview on practical approaches and successful examples, in this case from conservation and sustainable natural resource management. So what is the road ahead for our global project? Well, the Panorama platform was launched at the IUCN World Conservation Congress on the 5th of September by our GIZ and IUCN colleagues. Now we are currently in the process of collecting the first EbA solutions. We started in August, but we will continue until December. And in parallel, we are setting up the EbA solution platform, which will be finally launched at the Conference of Parties of the CBD in Cancun, Mexico on the 6th of December during the Climate Change Day of the Rio Convention's pavilion. And then, of course, after December, we are very much looking forward in staying in touch with you, staying in touch with the EbA community of practice in collecting more solutions, more practical examples from your work, which we can share with a broader public audience. So the question would be, are you a solution provider? If yes, please contact us and have a look at Panorama.solutions for getting inspiration. So, question is from my side if you have additional questions and comments on this short information. If yes, you can either raise your hand or you can use the chat function below. Okay, if this is not the case, you can also ask your questions after our thematic input, our feature inputs for this webinar, which brings us to a very interesting and exciting project in the Mata Atlantica, biodiversity and climate change. And I would like to now invite Jennifer Vieser, who is environmental analyst at the Brazilian Ministry of Environment, and Martin Becher, who is technical advisor from GIZ in Brazil, to share with us their experiences on applying the climate change impact assessment tool for the Atlantic forest. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. Greetings from Brazil. I hope everyone is listening to as well. And we are here to talk about the climate change impact assessment that we made for our project, that is the biodiversity and climate change in the Atlantic forest. I'm here with Martin, that here in our project we always work on doubles, like couples, and always with someone from the Ministry of Environment and someone from GIZ.
Hello, from my side.
Okay. So our project, the biodiversity and climate change in the Atlantic forest, has an aim to ensure that biodiversity conservation and forest restoration on protected areas mosaics are contributing to the adaptation to climate change in the Atlantic forest. So our project supports the consideration of climate change and EbA in public policies as well in territorial planning. And this territorial planning can be municipal planning or like protected areas management plans. And we promote this EbA consideration in 3 regions in Brazil. There are areas of protected areas mosaics. I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of mosaics, but are like a lot of protected areas on the same region together. And we have 3 regions that are the extreme south of the state of Bahia, the Atlantic Forest Central Fluminense, that is on the state of Rio de Janeiro, and Lagamar, that is on the coast of São Paulo and Paraná. So why we elaborate this climate change impact assessment? First, we have this demand for information on climate change and its impacts by our local partners. So they will be able to considerate climate change and EbA on their processes, on their policies and in planning. But we did only a climate change impact assessment and not the whole vulnerability analysis. And this is why, because we made this assessment for the Atlantic forest as a whole, and also with these 3 regions in mind. And because of this, because we did the study for the whole Atlantic forest, we use only biophysical impacts, because socioeconomic data are local specific. So these inputs of socioeconomic data would be a second step for elaborate a full analysis for vulnerability analysis.
So, just go back again. In Brazil, we have an institute that takes care of gathering and modeling climate data. It's called INPE. And usually it only delivers its data as numbers, not maps. So a very first step in order to know how climate change will eventually impact in Brazil and the Mata Atlântica forest as a whole, we took the numeric data from INPE and tried to spatialize it. So, in fact, for Brazil, unfortunately, we only have 2 models, HAGEM and MUROC. And these models, for these models, we make the decision to take the average. Why that? Because we as we knew that the data would be analyzed by local stakeholders, we tried to make the information as understandable as possible. So we preferred to take the average and make the information more palatable. From these climate projections, which we had for the RCP 4.5 and 8.5 scenarios, we also had a downscaling area of southeastern Brazil. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have a 20 by 20 scale, a spatial resolution for both models and for all scenarios. But for the southeastern side, we have a 5 by 5 kilometer spatial resolution only for the HAJAM model and only for 8.5 model. So at the end of the day, for all of Brazil, we can have a more or less decent resolution, and for southeastern Brazil, a very good resolution, but only for one model and one scenario. The climate data provided by INPE is quite detailed, so we don't only have future averages for the time from 1961 to 2005, but also for different time frames until 2100 and for different climate extremes. Unfortunately, the names here are in Portuguese, but from left to right we have heat waves, we have more likelihood of droughts, we have hot nights, and we have intense rainfall. Just to take some of the examples, we had a couple of other extremes as well, which were considered in our modeling.
Okay, I'll try to explain a little about our methodology. It's not as simple to explain, but I'll give it a try. For our potential impact assessment, first we got this climate exposure data. As Martin told us, this data was from the Spatial Research National Institute from Brazil, and we elaborated 1,024 maps of climate exposure. These 1,024 maps contemplate the two scenarios of climate change, 4.5 and 8.5, for trimesters to ensure we contemplate the seasons variability. So we have the summer for December, January, February, and then March, April, May, and so on. We have 4 regions. These 4 regions are for the Atlantic forest as a whole, and our 3 protected areas mosaics that we work on our project. And we have 4 projections, time projections. We have the present one that we use to calibrate and validate the projections. And we have projections for 2040, 2070, and 2100. For climate, we use 8 variables that are temperature, temperature variation, precipitation, and precipitation variation, and 4 variables that are from extreme meteorological events, that are the ones that Martin told us. These acronyms, they are CDD, that are consecutive dry days, R10 millimeters, that are precipitation exceeding 10 millimeters per day, TN90P, the trends of warm nights with minimum temperature above 90% of historical scenario, and WSDI, that is warm spell duration index that represents heat waves. Second, for the potential impact assessment, we gathered 28 maps of biophysical attributes for our 4 regions. For this, we have 7 attributes that are soil type, vegetation cover, that is the remaining of forest that we have, vegetation type, that are different existence, watershed and hydrography, land use and land cover, altimetry above sea level, And actually here it's wrong, it's not distribution of dengue fever vector, but the dengue fever occurrence that we have in Brazil. And we cross our data of climate exposure and biophysical attributes, so we could elaborate 896 maps of potential impacts that include the 2 scenarios, the 4 trimesters, the 4 regions, and the 4 time projections. And we have 7 impacts that are floods, erosivity, landslides, the distribution of dengue fever vector, soil moisture, agricultural zoning, and the vegetation distribution. And in this slide, we have a more detailed explanation about the methodology we used, showing the data inputs and the outputs we got, and how we got there. But I'm not going further with the methodology explanation, but you can see them after we have this presentation. You can consult that slide. Only for example, the second input that we have here is the precipitation. The precipitation data was used for calculating rain erosivity, which was used also for water erosion, and gave us the information about the potential soil erosion by water. That is one of our impacts. The water erosion used here was also considered for the soil degradability that led to landslides, and so on. So a lot of inputs that we have can be combined to show us different outputs that we need.
So in the next few slides, we would like to show you a few examples on how we worked, not elaborating too much because afterwards you will get the PowerPoint. So just to, for our first example, how we calculated potential flood impacts, future ones. On the one hand side, we took the variables of precipitation, mainly working with weather extremes. Then as well the municipal infrastructure like piping, etc. There we have some data, publicly available data here. And the topography, of course, that has to do with the stream order, because that calculates the volume, the horizontal distance, declivity, and the vertical distance, what again gives us a morphometric index, and that then gives us also floods, eventual flood events. All data generated by the modeling was validated. In this case, we validated it with a map generated by ourselves of natural-related disasters, which were mainly given to us by publicly available information of newspapers or other news, and this information was then placed on a digital map. So the validation was quite okay, and we can now tell you that in the map of the whole Atlantic forest, mainly if we look at RCB 8.5 but also RCB 4.5, the south will suffer from increasing floods. The map shows only a percentage, so these are not absolute numbers but percentages. And the good news is that probably the northeast and east of Brazil will suffer less from floods in the future. However, currently the main hotspots for floods are already the south and southeast, so this is eventually an interesting message also for decision makers to take decisions for the future. Only for one example right now, I will show you how we did the downscaling for our 3 main project regions. In the on the top, you can see the mosaic in Rio de Janeiro, where you can see in the middle from 2041 to 2070, where it's red, that's the main mountainous region where we work. So eventually here we will suffer even from more floods. In 2011 we had a very, very big flood event and landslide event with over 1,000 dead people. So this will for sure also be used by decision makers. In the bottom left we have São Paulo and Paraná, Lagamar region, where we can see that there will also be an increase, and for the south of Bahia on the right hand side, there we have two different informations depending on the scenario, in fact, so this will be a tricky issue for decision makers. So, for rainfall, erosivity, and landslides, we took for modeling again precipitation, which was already calculated before, topography, and the soil type, because soil type also defines the erosivity and therefore also landslides. And again, we validated it with a register of landslides events by the National Disaster Risk Authority, and the validation also was quite okay. And as landslides often also occur in flooding areas because they are dependent on extreme rainfall events, we have a similar result as for floods. And the same, of course, also for landslides. Here you can see differences between two moments of the year. Just to give an example, on the left hand side for the rainy season, December, January, February, and on the right hand side for the dry season. As you can see on the left hand side, mainly for the rainy season there will be a big increase, and again for the southeastern area of Brazil, which already suffers more from landslides.
Okay, for the dengue fever vector, we took a lot of variables. I don't know if I need to get through all of these. I think you got the idea of how the dynamics of this study works. So maybe you can, after that, read these with more detailed. I'm going to pass straight to our results. Here we have two sets of maps. The first is for summer, that is really hot and humid. And the second one is for our winter, that is dry. And you can see the black lines inside the map. They show the different regions from Brazil. And you can see that for 4.5 and 8.5, and also for December, January, February, and June, July, August, that we have an increase of the distribution of the dengue fever vector in the southeast, mostly in southeast and south Brazil. And that occurs because these maps shows the percentage of increase, so always comparing with the historical data. And the southeast and south Brazil, we have less distribution of the Aedes aegypti, that is the dengue fever vector, than we have in the northeast Brazil. So northeast is going to stabilize, and southeast and south is going to have an increase of the dengue fever vector. That is really important because especially in South Brazil, we have so little dengue occurrence that this is going to, we will need to address this impact for South Brazil. For soil moisture, we calculated the soil water availability. And our results is that it also shows summer and winter, and comparing it with the historical with the projected. We can see here that the southeast, that is a region that is already suffering from droughts and low water availability, actually is getting worse. You can see that the soil moisture is descending, actually. And it's different from South Brazil, that is already right now suffering from floods and landslides, as Martin told us. The water, and also the water excess is considered negative for environments. It's a negative environment for agricultures. So South Brazil is going to suffer from low soil moisture, high soil moisture. We also have the agricultural zoning as our potential impact. And for the agro zoning, we elaborate maps that represent the water requirement satisfaction index that shows if the culture, the crop, is exposed to a low or a high climate sustainability. And these maps, they work together with a table with indexes for each crop, and you can see for each culture how they are going to, if they are in the right zoning for them. And for our vegetation types, we have 7 vegetation types that we classified for the Atlantic forest. And I'm showing you an example for the mixed umbrophilous forest. The mixed umbrophilous forest distribution is now, I don't know if you can see here in the map, but you have a little grayish area that is the distribution now, the natural distribution now. And the green areas show the area they are going to be suited for the distribution, and the red areas less suited. So you can see a little migration of this type of vegetation for South Brazil, mainly because of the temperature rising and the variation of precipitation. And we made maps like this for all our 7 vegetation types. These is our types. It's the dense umbrophilous forest, the mixed umbrophilous forest, the open umbrophilous forest. We are at a tropical forest. A semi-deciduous seasonal forest, deciduous seasonal forest, for pioneer formations, and ecotones. And ecotones are the areas that are the transitional areas between 2 different ecosystems. So you can see here the loss of the climatic aptitude and the gains of the climatic aptitude. We brought to you that the open umbrophilous forests are going to gain a lot of its climatic aptitude, while the deciduous seasonal forest is going to lose a lot. But the important part is the ecotones, that are these transition areas, are going to gain a lot of climatic aptitude. And it was expected that we found this result because they are transitional ecosystems. So they are the transition between 2 ecosystems. So it is expected on scenarios that the climate change, and we have a lot of changing in the variable of climate, that we're going to have more ecotones in these areas that are on transition.
So, almost finishing. After publishing or presenting some of the results and seeing what the models just gave us, we identify a couple of strengths and future challenges. Well, regarding the strengths, we can proudly say that this work has been the first work on climate change impacts in the Atlantic forest that was spatialized, where we really can name specific areas for specific impacts. So this is kind of a success, and I guess that this is also quite interesting for decision makers. And it also meets local partners' demands, because we started this work when we started to talk with our local partners and tried to convince them to consider climate change into the local planning. They told us, well, we don't have any information how climate change might impact us in the future. So these maps are quite accessible, they are quite easy to read, and they are at least a first basis for decision making. Of course, and that's the last point for the strengths, we still need to make a vulnerability assessment, because we still don't know how these biophysical impacts will impact on the socioeconomic level and what kind of adaptive capacity each area has. Nonetheless, we understand that this is a robust methodology, and we believe that this is a first step for future adaptation efforts in the Atlantic forest. The challenges, of course, are on the one hand side, the quality and the scale of the entry data. As you may have seen, the sensitivity maps are kind of rough regarding the scale and also the quality. And a challenge is, as well as that's a feedback we got, that we used the average between two models. The decision of using an average was, on a first moment, to have palatable and easy to read information for local partners. But now that we presented our results, also national partners got interested, and they would also like to know what each model is saying, because they are not always saying exactly the same thing. So a further step will be an additional effort to divide again both models and have two different maps. Then we would have just double of them. Another challenge is regarding the availability and communication. All these maps and shapefiles are quite heavy. We have approximately 300 gigabytes of data, and it's being quite a challenge to make this data available for everybody. So we are looking for possibilities to place this data online and make it available, and have a nice architecture to make a download of shapefiles and maps.
Also, our last report about this study is 200 pages long, and it has a lot of technicalities, and it's really heavy to read. So we are working also on communication projects that are more easy and more fluid, so our partners can use this information.
Thank you. And these products will also be written for different kinds of public. So, for instance, let's say a manager of a conservation unit, a protected area, will need other kind of information and other kind of language than an agricultural production or eventually a physician. And finally, again, a challenge will be for us to take further steps for complete vulnerability assessment. We believe that for local decision makers, we need to take this data generated here to them, and then make a participatory vulnerability assessment, gather experts, local experts, national experts, but also local population, to see how this biophysical impact will impact to them socially and economically, and to then also detail what kind of adaptive capacity they already have and they surely will need for the future. So, from that point of view, we agree with the European Commission, which says that a major shift in adaptation studies has been the involvement from impact-based studies, which we have done right now, to the analysis of contextual vulnerability, which will be our next step. Finally, we cannot adapt to everything. We should focus on progress and not perfection. And we are aware that the work is not perfect, but we are sure that this has been a big step for everybody. And from this point, we thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward for your questions.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer and Martin, also from my side for this very exciting and practical presentation, also showing the potential of spatial information, but also the complexity of getting all these information together. And by these words, I would like to open the floor for any questions from your side. You can either raise your hand or use the chat function, but I can already see that Joachim, he has one question in the chat. It is possible to calculate the likelihood of these impacts and update them as the time goes by, helping decision makers in direction. If yes, is there a plan to do that? So actually really to give thorough information to decision makers. This is question number one. Question number two is, when do you plan to start the vulnerability studies, including socioeconomic data? Will these studies focus on resources, only on forest resources, or will they also include agriculture vulnerability?
So, first one. Regarding the likelihood, it's already possible now. Taking, as you might have seen, all maps show percentages. So how the likelihood might increase or decrease in percentage of a certain event, you can calculate the likelihood by taking what is the current likelihood. So if the map shows plus 20% for the year 2041, then you have a likelihood of 10% right now, then you can calculate the likelihood for the future. Calculating the second part of the question, blah 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 blah. As time goes by, helping decision makers to prioritize their actions. Well, of course, there is also a possibility to adjust the likelihood if we have additional information. Right now, INPI is already analyzing with a third model, and once the data of the third model is ready, potentially it would also be possible to calculate our biophysical potential impacts, also considering the data of the third model. Not sure if this responds to your question, but in fact, yes.
The question two about the starting the vulnerability assessment as a whole, we depend on our local partners and they, how do I say, they enthusiasm for developing the rest of this work, because as I said, socioeconomic data is local, and we need we need our local partners to how do I say this? Seus primeiros.
To be the first one to take ownership.
Yeah, yes, to take ownership of this work. We are taking the first steps to do this, but we don't have a plan with dates to finish this vulnerability assessment. It will depend on each local partner and each region of the project.
Then I'm seeing another question from
Yes.
Patricia.
Exactly.
How you decided what items to evaluate for possible impacts on each topic? Now, which items to evaluate for possible impacts? So I understand that it's a question about the methodology used for each impact. Each modeling is based on international available articles and more or less standard modeling. So the consultants that performed this modeling, they first had a literature review and analyzed which models might fit best for our different cases, and that was also then the basis for the modeling. Of course, it depended also very much on the available data here for Brazil, but as the validation showed, in fact, all of the models more or less show good results. So I cannot tell you if the models also work for other countries and other contexts, because it depends very much on data availability, but for Brazil it worked. Then we have Leah. Thank you for the presentation. How will you get from the vulnerability analysis to the implementation of actual adaptation measures?
Oh, this one is difficult. Actually, the project proposes to considerate climate change and EbA on planning and on public policies. So we are doing this already with a lot of the perception and with community working and using the knowledge of people to introduce climate change and EbA on plans and policies. And we hope with these results, with the impact assessment, we can also have inputs of scientific data for the plans and the policies. The project doesn't financiate measures on the ground, let me say. We are not going to plant trees or create new protected areas. We are just we just support policies and planning.
So Marion is asking, while waiting for the results of the vulnerability assessment, does the project already implement non-regret measures? So as Jennifer already elaborated, we are not implementing on the ground measures. However, the project was already designed with a strong focus on forest restoration. And while we were elaborating data for vulnerability assessments, we already started to give some assistance for the for an NGO and government pact on forest restoration in Mata Atlântica. It's mainly about knowledge generation on how to restore forests in different regions, methodologies, know-how, and monitoring for restoration monitoring, etc. So yes, that was our first measure, and we understand that forest restoration, as most EbA measures, is a non-regret measure, certainly. Then Patricia Umada, this assessment has helped define specific implementation actions.
Actions or actors?
Actions.
Actions. Not yet. Not yet, because we just got the final report and we are just trying to give all this data for our partners and work with our communication products. And we hope that inserting this data on planning, like protected areas management planning and municipal planning, we will be able with this data to identify actions of and measures of EbA for each context. Our project supports the elaboration and implementation of protected areas management plans, protection plans, integrated protection plans for the protected areas on a mosaic, and municipal plans for Atlantic forest that are a plan specific for municipalities of the Atlantic forest, and director planning that are like, I don't know this in English, is municipal planning. So we hope with this data they can, our partners can find actions and measures of EbA on their planning.
So, are there any additional questions? Oh, sorry, Matthias, I just took the moderation.
No problem, Martin. I like your initiative, and it's very authentic. So thank you very much also from my side. And I think there are no more additional questions. But I think Jennifer and Martin, the point you raised was quite important to really say this is now impact modeling. It's the first step in a longer process to provide decision makers with the required information on how to implement ecosystem-based adaptation approaches also in the field, on the ground, and we can certainly say that this approach needs time and resources. I think this is also feedback from our first webinar on vulnerability assessment and tools and the colleagues from Central Asia. But also from WCMC, they mentioned the same. It takes time and resources, but it's good investment for future planning. So thank you very much from my side. And just looking at the clock, sorry, we are a bit over time. Thank you very much for joining us. How do we continue from here? This was now our second webinar in October, focusing on impact and vulnerability assessments. There will be a third webinar coming up between two major UN conferences of parties. So it will be on the 24th of November, right after the UNFCCC Conference of Parties in Marrakesh, and right before the CBD Conference of Parties in Cancun. So a very exciting time of the year. We would also like to encourage you to send us your inputs and ideas for designing our webinars. Of course, we have already a pipeline of potential inputs for the upcoming webinars, but if you're interested to communicate to us either via a news input or a thematic input, your work on ecosystem-based adaptation, feel free to do so by contacting my colleague Alexandra Köngeta. I will just type down the email information for you in the chat function, so feel free to contact her. And in December and in January, we will start with our new discussion and webinar series on ecosystem-based approaches and evidence. So from my side and on behalf of our global project, thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you again in our next webinars. Have a good day. Bye-bye.